I am delighted by all the references that are in Icewind Dale to horror in general, and it really is a love note. And one of the creatures that is like the embodiment of this uh, is the Coldlight Walker. It's
Mm.
this creature that just has like a cloak and glowing light shooting out of its face. I think it's absolutely brilliant for a lot of reasons. Number one, when the thing came out, they couldn't just put the thing on the cover because they didn't really want you to see this amorphous, grotesque form
Mm.
on the movie poster. But they did do is have someone in a parka with just glowing light, cascading out of their face, almost exactly like this art. Um, the fact that they turned, I thought that was way more scary. And when I eventually watched the thing, that's why I assumed I would be encountering, right, in this film. The fact that they made this a real monster in D&D just warms my heart. Um, I guess that's ironic, but this is a really fun, scary. What I like about how evocative this is, you see the snow around it, you see the light and how a flashlight kind of illuminates snow so well. It's so interesting looking. If you've ever been in a snowstorm and you're flashing your flashlight out there, it creates a beam, the solid beam, and the idea that there are undead like this, you know, that are just wandering the wastes, and you see these rays of light. That's so scary because I can't imagine you think it's a welcoming light, probably as an adventurer. But if you see those, what are essentially searchlights moving through the snowstorm, that terrifies me.
It's like an anglerfish walking across the waste, come to the light.
Yeah, and almost like mini versions of Sauron in the eye, in the way
Mm.
that the eye
Mm.
moves, and you see that ray of light. Um, and when you've been had, I mean, like you suddenly light up for everyone to see.
Yeah.
It's not like they're certainly tough. They have multiple attacks. They've got a cold ray, obviously. They have blinding light as well. And anyone who's killed by them basically turns into one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, becomes one of these creatures as well. So the fact that these are just wandering Icewind Dale, and oh man, it's so iconic. I imagine the parents telling their children, "Beware the lights."
Mhm. And
This
it
is so much more worse than a will-o-wisp.
it is kind of in that same vein, and the horror goes beyond even that. If you pull up Coldlight Walker, its monster stats page on D&D Beyond, you can see its lore. Some humanoids who died of extreme cold,
Right.
but whose spirits languish in the mortal world become Coldlight Walkers. But that is only a piece of the puzzle. If you read through chapter 1 of this adventure, the stuff that details 10 towns, the lone bastions of civilization within the Dale, you will find that many of the towns are making sacrifices to Oriel to try and spare them her wrath. And there are some who sacrifice food. There are some who sacrifice their own warmth, right? They will go nights without burning oil to stay warm. They'll huddle
Mm-hmm.
together instead. And there are some towns who are selfish enough that they will sacrifice human lives, living humans. They will hurl them out of town and into the cold as living sacrifices. They will die of frostbite and exposure. That's a very sort of human evil. And in an almost mythic sort of way, that evil is karmically punished almost immediately because these human sacrifices to this wrathful god become these monsters. And so it is actively because of the greed and fear and selfishness of the people of 10 towns, the very people whom you are trying to save, that these hideous supernatural beings will harry you throughout your quest. And that terrifies me. Right? It's not just supernatural evil; it's also all the mundane, banal evils of humanity wrapped up too.
It's also the knowledge that if you're living in one of those towns,
Mm.
and say you killed Gregor or whatever, And that happened years ago, and you still see his light in the distance, wandering, the ice, looking for any one of you to exact his revenge. That's terrifying. That's pure horror. It's like when everyone knew one of the villagers had become a werewolf, and you hear its howl at night. It's a call to, this town has done terrible things. This town has ignored horrible things. And that's a big part of it too, I think, is monsters are ignored and allowed to exist. That's part of the horror of it, like some ways that people like maybe run dragons, that dragon is there because you've been sacrificing to it, or you've been whatever. It's proof of evil. And that is why this is so much more scary to me than a skeleton or a zombie or a reflavored vampire. This is proof of wrongdoing. And very sad too at the same time. I don't know why. It's more humanistic. Like, there's something always cartoony about zombies and skeletons to me, but this is like, it does give me chills.
And there are small moments in the adventure where you can see these sacrifices being made. And if you're the DM who wants to tell that kind of story, you could really return it to your players' knowledge later on. Like, you could have stopped this. If you were willing to risk your own reputation and your own safety within this town, you could have not only saved an innocent life, but you could have saved yourself the threat of facing the thing that it has become later. So really, this encounter is on you.
And if I had a TPK in this game, I would totally make all of the people Coldlight walkers and then reintroduce them to their own
cruel.
So that's on my top 3 for sure. What else you got?
I'd like to talk about a particular monster. This is not a new monster from the adventure. The ancient white dragon is nothing new to D&D. It's from the monster manual. But there is a particular ancient white dragon called, and I am going to try and not mess this up because dragons have wild names, Arveiaturace.
It's such good art.
Arveiaturace.
That art is so good. It's so lizardy. That large throat and that mouth.
That's that iguana-like thing. Yes.
It's just a bucket of a mouth. It's so scary.
This is a creature that you won't see discussed in the monster section of this book, but rather in chapter 2, the realms of Icewind Dale itself, where you'll be encountering random creatures and just kind of exploring the ice wastes on your way to various points of interest throughout the Dale. And this creature is very interesting to me because when I look at the monster manual, there's a fair bit of lore on kind of how each age category of dragon acts, just a little bit, just to give you a taste of what it feels like. And you can kind of get the impression yourself. Wormlings are young and naive and maybe a little bit reckless. Young dragons are that, but turned up. They're beginning to form their own hordes. Adult dragons have this sort of presence and power to them, and they may have taken over entire regions of the world. But ancient dragons, these creatures that are pushing CR 20, that are almost kind of demigod-like in their power themselves, it can be hard to wrap your mind as a player or a DM around how to run these creatures, because they're people. They're intelligent in the way that people are, even if white dragons in particular are somewhat bestial in nature. They still have a keen intellect and savvy. And so this is a worm that is legendary throughout Icewind Dale. Arveiaturace, the white worm, is not just a creature that people in 10 towns will speak of in hushed tones, but this is a lore character. Laeral Silverhand has chatted with this dragon in Forgotten Realms lore, and this being has lived for well over, I think, 10 centuries. So when your characters are 5th level, an encounter with an ancient white dragon who is a CR 20 creature is not a fight that any DM would set up as a set him up and knock him down sort of battle, because the only people getting knocked down are the players in this fight. There's one more interesting thing about this creature, I think, that needs to be said, and it's you can see this guy on his back. If you're looking at the art up there, you can see this dude there, and this is a wizard whose name is Melthorond, who is himself a Forgotten Realms lore character, but you need to know too much about his lore because he's dead. And he's been dead for quite some time. But this dragon has formed such a close bond with him that his frozen corpse remains strapped to a saddle on the dragon's back. They fought in wars together long time ago. And this dragon still talks to the corpse of his former friend, and who is sat upon that saddle. And there are so many role-playing opportunities for this, right? This, like I said before, this dragon is not a knock 'em down. This is a social encounter in a CR20 package. Who, you know, if the characters really screw up bad, then maybe ice one of them, just to show that there are consequences for belittling even a blind, half senile ancient dragon.
I mean, I wouldn't not recommend a Bard College of Eloquence for for this adventure. You might talk your way out of a few really key situations. It's another thing I absolutely adore about the adventure is so often these are social encounters and social outcomes in some very surprising locations in the game, actually, where I would just assume, all right, this is a death trap. That this is how it's going to go. But yeah, that's a fantastic monster and an encounter, and it's a good example of just bringing back a typical D&D monster and making it fresh and new and fun.
Yeah, this is a creature that you as a DM could create. This adventure, it shows you really keenly how you could do this yourself. An ancient dragon who talks to a corpse still strapped to its back, that you haven't had to do a single bit of numerical game design. You've already created an encounter that goes far and beyond what the monster manual itself gives to you.
And that lends that villain, that creature, to have an emotional spectrum.
Yes.
You know, and something you suddenly can connect with this creature. But you know, this is why I've had adventures where, like, you know, I've had, it may be a bit of a cliche, but like a green dragon is attacking a city because they stole its eggs, its babies. Like the showing that these monsters, especially when they're less human looking, more and more, and they're more of a threat, giving them reasons and desires and wants and their own schemes becomes even more important, because I love interacting with monsters I should not be talking to. I was in a encounter with a primordial god. B. Dave Walters was DMing. I was, of course, playing Avern. I rolled a natural 20 on my persuasion check, where I was talking smack about how he was not that impressive. Literally a natural 20. Turned around, was about to head out a portal and decide, no, I'm going to kick his ass real quick instead. I literally, you get these opportunities to potentially save an entire world by, you know, talking some smack. That's pretty amazing, and that's what social encounters are great. Or saving everyone, right? This is why portals in D&D are exciting, because they tend to have someone who's guarding them. So you have to have that conversation.
A very Planescape, yes.
Yeah.
So if you've been hearing about this creature and you want to get a little bit more information on how you might want to run it, there's a quick description of how this dragon thinks and acts in the beginning of chapter 2 of this book. But if you go down a little farther, this creature is actually tied directly to a specific point of interest, the wreck of an abandoned ship called the Dark Duchess. It's a pirate vessel that got stuck in the sea of moving ice, and Arveiaturace has placed some of her treasure hoard within it, and there are quests that will lead you to there, and you can see her how the book thinks she ought to act firsthand, just to give you even a little bit more of an idea of how you might run this very unique and interesting creature.
We do have a real quick question from Chad.
Please.
How would it how would I raise the CR rating of some of these creatures if
Mm,
I want to take a higher level party into Icewind Dale? I mean, this is always a thing. We're
mhm,
always thinking about ways to do this. Sometimes you can just up the hit points, up the damage, or you bring in more creatures to add to that encounter. We have an encounter builder that kind of lets you know how lethal something
mhm,
will be. So if I was like going against Coldlight walkers, I'd put a few extra in there, or I'd put in an undead polar bear, or whatever you need to do to make that
mhm,
like things go wrong pretty quick if you add enough monsters.
mhm,
Certainly, I know DMs will add hit points.
mhm. Yeah,
Not as flashy, but
I think, Todd, you're right on the money. I think my best advice for a DM who wants to make encounters harder is to be as lazy as possible. It could be very gratifying to like do game design, do like actual numerical game design and create new creatures and add new abilities and stuff like that. And it's good and it's useful and it's cool. And it's great practice if you want to do actual game design in the future. That's how I got my start making new monsters in third edition. But it takes a long time. It's a lot of work. And you can get just as good of a result by increasing the monster's armor class by like 2 points, maximizing its hit points, right? The hit points in a monster's entry are only the average hit points for that monster. If you went and
yeah.
you rolled all of the hit dice and then added all of its constitution, you could get a creature with drastically higher or lower hit points. So just maximize its potential hit points. Make sure that every one of its hit dice has rolled the maximum result. And suddenly you have a creature whose hit points are suddenly something like 50% higher than they were originally. And that's huge.
And
Um, yeah.
and to your point, yeah. I mean, that's a good example of okay. Well, skeleton is pretty weak, right? Well, put it in full plate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and make sure that I don't know, maybe it's been enchanted with a spell that makes all of its weapons deal deep wounds, and what
Hmm.
all that means is that it never has to roll for damage. It always rolls the maximum amount on its damage dice.
Now,
Uh,
I think also adding like feats from actually that are meant for
mhm,
players to
mhm,
monsters is pretty handy.
mhm,
I wouldn't say no to monster feats
mhm,
that I could just slap onto any monster I want to. That would
mhm.
be pretty cool. But yeah,
the
that's go ahead.
the danger that you run when you get into changing a monster's numbers is that you're never quite sure what its new challenge rating will actually shake out to. It's all a bit of guesswork. um, there is some math in the Dungeon Master's Guide that gives you sort of quick monster building math, and if all you're doing is changing hit points and damage, then you can actually do that pretty easily. Take the CR creature that you're working with already and just kind of plug those new numbers you've got into the table the DMG has laid out for you, and you'll have a pretty good estimate of what its new challenge is.